Your friends are scrolling through short content, but you, my friend, you're here to learn. Welcome to the RAAAZ Clips. I want to begin by asking you if you're aware of how much tension there is between India and China, to the degree where even people who watch the show probably are united by this dislike about China. They might be divided because of religion, belief systems, political affiliations. Everyone dislikes China. That's how much dislike there is for China right now, to the degree where Chinese products are looked down upon, Chinese brands are rejected. And I think the average Indian YouTube podcast consumer is also very aware of the whole Hambantota port situation in Sri Lanka. Long story short, I'm going to give you a short version of what I have learned through YouTube channels like Think School. And then please correct me or give me the Sri Lankan perspective. China is like renowned to give bad loans to countries who are in economic need. Those loans are not easy to pay back, and China's contracts are slightly vague. So eventually what happens is if you can't pay China back, you have to part ways with an asset, which in the case of Sri Lanka and China was that Hambantota port. Now that particular port is extremely important commercially, geopolitically, etc. And there are parts of India and people in India who feel extremely threatened that I believe even a Chinese warship was parked there as recently as last year. So there is this cultural friendliness between India and Sri Lanka. But because of this Chinese existence at that Hambantota port, and there is a Chinese existence within Sri Lanka as well, India's just feeling slightly concerned. Please give me the Sri Lankan narrative, sir. Correct me if I've said something wrong, and I'm very sorry if I've crossed a line.
No. I'm trying to think how to start the answer because it'll be a long answer, but let me
take your time.
Start it from somewhere. Well, firstly, what I said, I mean, Sri Lanka's location has been always our biggest opportunity and our biggest challenge. Opportunity because if we use it properly, we could have, and we still could, become a very fast-growing country, and for us, we can be the gateway into the Indian subcontinent, like what Hong Kong could be to China or the Netherlands is into Europe. It can be the gateway. Equally, yes.
Geopolitically speaking, whoever controls the oceans controls the world in many ways.
One way of looking at it, especially throughout history, it has been that. And Sri Lanka has a very strategic port, which is Trincomalee. Hambantota is not really a strategic port. Trincomalee is where I think, which is the second largest natural harbor in the world. It can bring in any ship that has been built by man. It's a natural blessing that we have.
Where is it?
In the northeast part. It's eastern part of Sri Lanka.
Gotcha.
And it's a beautiful place if you ever visit that. You know, the outer harbor of Trincomalee, there is an a UK, British aircraft carrier, HMS Hermes, which sank during the Second World War. It sank there, and it's right at the bottom, and divers go down there to look at fish. Despite that, you can bring in any ship that has been built even over there. It's so deep, and it's naturally deep. So that is the strategic port. And throughout recent history, there has been always this fear that somebody would get hold of Trincomalee. Both, it could be a threat to the region, but also people are worried globally. Now, for example, we are talking of the geopolitics today. In the 1980s, Sri Lanka was perceived to be, by some in India, being too close to the Americans because our then president was quite close to President Reagan. And because of that, we had a lot of tension with India. It's probably the most difficult period with India that we went through was in the 1980s when this perception was there that India was too close, Sri Lanka rather, was too close to the Americans. Now, today we have a similar situation at times with China because geopolitics change. We cannot, as a small country, control geopolitics because India is a superpower now. US is there as a superpower. China is there, taking superpower in a broader sense. And we can't control that. We have to accept that as it is. But the only policy that we have as Sri Lanka is that we cannot be in any way seen to be a threat to India. Because we are part of, geographically, we are part of, we are civilizationally the same. Yes, we discussed that. Our blood is the same. We discussed that. But geographically, we are the same. So anything that happens in Sri Lanka, nobody in India should look at it as something that our leaders, regardless of what political party, we are a very divided country. We have politicians who hate each other like here probably. But whoever is in office, nobody will do anything that is a threat to India knowingly. Now the issue is sometimes through commercial transactions and other activities, is it perceived that what we are doing is a threat to India? That's where the quality of the dialogue matters between our leaders, whoever the leaders are. Now recently our president was here. He met with Prime Minister Modi. They had lunch alone together, just the two of them, which is, I think, important with leaders. They need to talk to each other. We are diplomats, we are intermediaries. Really, conversations must take place between leaders.
Because the decisions come from there.
They come from there, and opinions are also formed there.
Okay.
So the two leaders met. Dr. Jayashankar and our president had a private dinner together. NSA Doval and the president had private breakfast together so that they could understand each other and to make sure we keep communicating. Because China, there is a Chinese investment in Hambantota. Our perspective is that it is a commercial investment. There are many in Delhi that believe that there is a military dimension to it. I think
our whole country believes it's a military dimension.
So therefore, we need to see how we can ensure that you don't have that impression. So you mentioned about a ship which came last year. That was a missile tracking vessel. It was not a warship, but it was a missile tracking vessel. But today, technology. There is dual-use technology. You can use something to track a missile, or you can use something to track a weather satellite. So this vessel was seen to be, on the Indian side, as being something that could be used for either purpose. Now, our people had approved it on the basis of a research vessel because they thought this was a tracking vessel that was used for more, let's say, benign purposes. But there were others who believed that could be used for military purposes. So we had a conversation on that. And in the future also we will have to have conversations because China is a power that is present in the Indian Ocean. They do send ships across. And so we will have to have a conversation to ensure that India and we are aligned on what is a threat. Because what we have taken the position is what is a threat to India is a threat to us. So then when it comes to the debt issue with China, which you also touched upon, I don't think we have got caught into the Chinese debt trap at all. We borrowed from China. We used it for investments in roads, in ports. We used it that way. But we have not, we have to now restructure that debt. And that negotiation is complicated because the Chinese have a different worldview of how the the financial system should be run as opposed to the rest of the world. This is a serious issue because they feel that they would like to redefine some aspects of the international financial system. So they are not accepting the Bretton Woods institutions, like the World Bank and the IMF, the Paris Club, and what, let's say, India would also believe. So that is the issue there, how we renegotiate that debt. That is going on. With India, I must stress at this point, you saved us last year. That is something I would like your audience. I know it's a younger audience and I want to impress upon.
I also promise you Dr. Jayashankar will be watching this.
Well, I watched his program, so I hope he watches ours. But basically, he played a very important role. Because at that time last year, when we were in crisis, nobody came forward to help us. It was India who came forward. $4 billion last year. That is a lot of money. And it was no questions asked. That's how it happened. And if you had not stepped in at the time, we would have had bloodshed. We were spared bloodshed last year. We had a change in president, but it happened in a peaceful way. And then after that, the international community was also slow to step forward. India went out there. Mrs. Sitaraman went out there. Dr. Jayashankar went out there. Mr. Ajit Doval went out there and said, help Sri Lanka. So on the debt restructuring you referred to, everybody was slow on making a commitment, India gave a letter of financing assurances saying we are willing to take the lead in that. And now, of course, the conversation is going on with the rest of the world and with China also, how to do it. But China has a different way of doing things. So that is the challenge. I mean, that's a challenge for you, that's a challenge for us. So, but on the security side, all I can say is from the point of view of our leaders, regardless of political parties in office, Sri Lanka does not want to be perceived as in any way helping the security, harming the security of India. Because we have an understanding on both sides. I think India also has always looked out for us in the recent past. When we had, even recently, when we had a terrorist bombing, India warned us also in advance when whatever information they had about that. So they have been always very responsive. So in our case, there is no intention here on that. But perceptions are important to clear. I think that's what you are saying.
Yeah. What I will definitely say is I've learned a lot about geopolitics through the show. I learned even more when I actually got to speak to our cabinet ministers. This is the energy I picked up. I might be slightly wrong in saying some of these things, but I feel India is, again, very economically driven. We're a country where in our point in our timeline, we want to make money. We want to build businesses. We want to take India back to being the Sone ki Chidiya, which means the golden sparrow. Okay, we want to become rich again. We don't want no shit with nobody. That's the honest truth.
Yes.
Like, we don't want fights.
Right.
But I also know very intensely it's the era of Dr. Jaishankar. So if someone messes with us, we'll mess back. We don't want fights with China, but they seem to be the aggressors right now. Where if they line up on our borders in Ladakh, or if they stop their ships in that Hambantota port, I don't think we'll back down either, because that's just the spirit right now of India, which is why these conversations are important. And it's important for me to be very straightforward with you also, sir. Yeah. While I know that the decision makers are in the ministries right now in our two countries, it's important for me as a youth-oriented podcaster to ask you these questions and to bring up these topics. And I don't mean to make this...
I think that it's important. And one way of getting over this problem is also what we are discussing now. That is how to integrate the Sri Lankan economy better with the Indian economy. Because I think if that happens, this conversation, the geopolitical conversation, becomes in a way less relevant. So this time when our president visited here, there was a joint economic vision that was put forward between President Wickremesinghe and Prime Minister Modi. And in that, we talk of integration at different levels. One is connectivity in the context of having a oil pipeline connectivity, electricity cable connectivity, and even prospectively a road connecting India and Sri Lanka. I mean, this is just 50 kilometers or less, I mean, depending how you measure it. It's not a big distance, and it's very shallow as well. And so through that process, then we are talking of ferries, aviation. Then when the two economies get integrated that way, then there is less reason to be insecure. Then we are talking of trade, where we can open out more. We have a free trade agreement, but we are looking at going beyond that. We have also now rupee as a currency, Indian rupee, to be used in trade. And then investments, to have more, bigger investments coming from India to Sri Lanka. And especially now as we restructure our economy, how can we get more Indian companies to come in? Now, if this is done, I think we will be seen to be less remote. Because at the moment, we seem to be still too far away. Although we talk of all the civilizational links and blood links and all that, still it's too far away. Now, you went to Sri Lanka. Did you see any hostility towards the Indians? No,
not at all.
And you felt comfortable?
Loved it.
So that is, so now if we connect more, I have a theory that if we can get more school kids in Sri Lanka to visit India, even whether it's Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra, very soon these misunderstandings will go away, because then geopolitics will be not what we will be talking about. I feel we will then be talking about something else.
I'll tell you, I might be wrong in saying this, but the perception I get is, geopolitically speaking, India looks at Sri Lanka as a brother, but right now, our so-called enemy, China, is just positioning itself near our brother. That's how we're looking at it. And it's happening more and more from a geopolitical spectrum.
No, that is true. I mean, when I mentioned, you see, in the 80s, when this perception was there with the Americans also, because at that time, US and India were not close, we had similar challenges. So we have to, on our side, learn from that. And I think from India's side also learn from it and make sure we don't leave any daylight there. We have to work quickly. And now I see that difference because there is close communication between our leaders.
Okay.
And that is what is extremely important because a lot of these things come through misunderstandings.
Wow.
And when you look at now Hambantota port, for example, originally, Sri Lanka offered it to India to develop. We needed to develop the port. But at that time, there were no real port developers in India who were in a position to do that.
Roughly when was this, sir?
This was in the early 2000s when this was discussed initially. It was offered to India at that time.
Do you know if it was the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government?
No, I think it was probably Congress government at the time, I think.
And they didn't take up the opportunity.
It was more than the government. I think the problem was you did not have strong port developers at the time who could do it at the time. And there was no interest at that time.
I don't know. I mean, I know the entrepreneurial spirit of India. Mukesh Ambani was rich even then.
He was, but I don't think he was doing ports. Now, if you look at it, I mean, take a concrete case of Mr. Adani. He is developing a terminal in Sri Lanka. And he invested last year when the height of our crisis, when nobody would invest in Sri Lanka, he came and invested. I mean, we are very grateful for him for that because he took that risk. Because if you look at Colombo port, this is something else when it comes to port. Hambantota is not a big port, although there is a strategic issue, I don't deny that. Colombo is our main port, main commercial port. 80% of the business of Colombo port is transshipment business. Of that, around 75% goes to India. So Colombo port is an Indian port, really. I mean, doing business with India. That's the main market. India is the main market. So therefore, because you don't have deep water ports in India, you don't have that many. So Colombo has deep water terminals. So the big ships come there and they unload and the small ships take the cargo into India. So, and in reverse. So now we are looking at, with Adani Group investment, we are looking at developing port with India. At that time, there were that kind of private sector presence was not there. This was a more recent part of recent development.
Were you in politics at that time, which you're talking about?
Yes, I was in politics. I can't remember where I was, but I would have been somewhere in politics at that time.
I'm sure you were involved in the conversation at least to a degree.
Yeah,
at least you had a deeper understanding than the average Indian or the average Sri Lankan.
Definitely.
Which is why I want to ask you about that particular loan that Sri Lanka took from China. I believe it was $1 billion loan in order to develop that port. Why did Sri Lanka agree to take that loan from China? Was it because the World Bank was denying...
No, for the port, you see, the south of Sri Lanka is, in Sri Lanka, the two most underdeveloped areas are the north and the south. North is where the Tamil community by and large resides, and that area, there has to be more to be done to develop, and now that the programs for that are going, and that's where the war was. In the deep south is also very poor. So there was a need for a port in the deep south. And every government that was in office would talk about this during elections and was not able to deliver once they were in office. So the president at that time, President Mahinda Rajapaksa, he took a decision that somehow we must try to build a port in the deep south. In fact, he came from Hambantota. That was his hometown. That was his constituency also. So they looked around. Nobody was interested from the private sector side to do it. They looked for financing. They were not able to get it. And finally, yes, because nobody else was available, China gave the financing. Then subsequently, what happened was that after the port was built, there was a line of thinking that we had to reduce our debt, which is correct. I mean, we had too much debt across the board, and so therefore, that's when this debt equity, if you want to call it that, I mean, it was swapped for a loan. A loan was swapped for a lease of the port. That's when it was done to try to improve our situation as far as our economic balance was concerned. So that's how it happened.
So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you check out this playlist for more videos just like this. It's TRS Clips.